Welcome to You Rise Me Up, a podcast about Asian Europeans from all walks of life. I'm your host Ching, a German-born Chinese. Today I have with me Dan Cariño, a Swedish-Filipino product designer, content creator, and career coach. Dan and I met as part of some Asians in Europe clubhouse sessions that are organized with some friends during the pandemic. Funny enough, we later realized that he had actually already met my younger brother Phil in Hong Kong in 2015 when they both spent their exchange semester there. Dan also later joined Klarna, the company where I started my software engineering career, around the same time I left the company last year. It's a pleasure to have you here, Dan.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's funny that we've crossed paths a few times, especially meeting your brother. That's very unlikely.
Yeah, it is. There are actually not a lot of people that have met my siblings. So yeah, I think life definitely wanted us to be friends because what are the chances of meeting in some random clubhouse rooms?
Yeah, it was leading up to this moment right now.
Yeah, definitely. So Dan, you are the first Swedish-Filipino person I've ever met. What was it actually like growing up as a Filipino in Sweden?
So I grew up in Stockholm, a suburb in the south of Stockholm, and I have two younger sisters. I don't think in the beginning, when I was a child, really reflected on being Asian because everyone else was white. And it was just my parents that looked different, but I don't think I even registered them as looking different. The funny thing is, I think in the school, there was only 3 other Asians out of 300. 2 of them were adopted, and the third one was my sister. I remember actually when I was in second grade or something, there was a kid who went up to me and said, "Hey, how do you read those characters?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I was like, I can't read them. And then I think later I was like, why did he ask me that? So I think at that point when I was a kid, I didn't even make the connection. Like, why would he think that I knew how to read Chinese characters? I don't think that people treated me differently. I think Sweden isn't that much of an overtly racist country. I do think people have a lot of prejudice, but they won't say it out loud. You can kind of tell sometimes based on how they say certain things, but at least it's not overtly racist, which I think is kind of a bad thing as well, because then you cannot really talk about it or solve it. But so far, I haven't experienced anything super racist against me. So there weren't a lot of Asians around me, and it wasn't until I got into like Korean culture, K-pop, Korean variety shows, where I kind of seeked out other groups that also consumed this, and then those happen to be Asians. And then in university, when people from around the country gathered to the tech university, then there were a lot of Asians again.
You mentioned that there were only 3 other Asian kids in your school.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't reflect on your Asianness at the time, but how did you perceive these Asians? Like, did you treat them differently? Did you perceive them differently? Or was it just the same for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at that time, so this was in elementary school, I didn't really think about it then. I think it was later in my teens. At that time, there were a lot of Asian YouTubers. And I think that was one of the first times I had Asian role models that weren't my parents or my cousins. And I think that is when I started to become more aware of my Asianness. But it's not something I have thought a lot about. It's still something that I'm learning about. I started to think more about it as we talked about this podcast. I think it's a great idea about having something for Asian Europeans because we don't have any podcast except for this. This is the first one. Yeah, I wasn't super aware of my Asianness, which I think people around me would be surprised about now because I am surrounded by Asian stuff. Now that I'm reflecting over it, it's interesting how that happened.
And you mentioned those Asian YouTube creators. What are some examples of Asian creators that you discovered around that time, and what did you like about them?
So at that time, it was like the Wine Cone. I don't know if you know about him.
No.
It was super big when YouTube was super small. So it was the Wine Cone, Kev Jumba, Niga Higa, maybe also Wong Fu production. And I think, one thing was that they were relatable. They would talk about their experiences with their family. So even though the ones I mentioned are all East Asian, except for the wine cone, who's Vietnamese, even though we're not kind of from the same exact part of the world, I still could relate to them, at least a lot more than I could relate to, what I was watching on Swedish television or even like American TV shows. So they could just speak to my experiences. I don't know how to exactly explain it, but there's something about seeing someone who looks like you. Because sure, we can all look up to role models that are not similar to you. But it kind of gets weird if everyone you see does not look like you, you know?
Yeah.
Like that kind of sends a subconscious message that, oh, people like me, they don't really belong here or they don't fit in. So I think that was really something. It was very new, like having these YouTubers all looking similar to me, being relatable, being popular as well. I think that really inspired me.
What are some examples of these relatable experiences that you saw in these videos?
Yeah, a few examples. I don't know exactly if this is from YouTube, but I remember reading somewhere about how whenever you went to McDonald's, your parents would ask you to take the salt and pepper and napkins. And I was like, wait, that's not just my parents?
Yeah.
So things like that. And also talking about things about how questions people might have. So, how people could ask, oh, where are you from? Oh, no, but where are you really from? So talking about those kinds of experiences. But another thing that I've also reflected about is that this isn't technically Asian experiences. I would say anyone who has parents from a country that is not the West, so it could be, people from Egypt or from India. I think they also have very similar experiences, at least that part when it comes to how your parents behave sometimes. Like being resourceful, I would say. It creates a lot of similar behaviors.
Definitely. And I can I can so relate to these like random realizations that it's not just your parents, because at one point, and it was only in recent years that someone sent me a TikTok. I think the person was Singaporean, but basically the TikTok was about the fact that Asian parents and grandparents, they don't apologize. They never say, "Hey, I'm sorry," because they really respect the elderly and there's a certain hierarchy attached to being older. But what they do instead is they cut you fruits. And when I watched that TikTok, I think that was the first time it dawned on me that my parents were the same and my grandparents too. And I never realized that that meant like, I'm sorry or I love you. It was just something that my grandparents and parents did. And I didn't understand the context of it until I watched that TikTok. And then I was like, oh my God, all these years, I never realized that that is like the way that my parents and grandparents apologize. So yeah, I found that like quite funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because one benefit with talking with other people who are also Asian is you start to see patterns. And if they hear someone else share something that you've also experienced, like cutting fruit, and then they like, oh, but that means I'm sorry, then you get new insights, which I think it would be very difficult to realize that by yourself.
Yeah. I also remember there was this very popular Facebook page called Subtle Asian Traits.
Oh, yeah. What happened to that?
I have no idea.
Is it still active?
I think it probably is, but I haven't been on Facebook for ages. But I just know that there were a lot of memes that they shared on there that was just so relatable.
Oh, that's actually super funny because, sure, it's called subtle Asian traits, but most of it is East Asian, which I don't know how to feel about it because if people keep saying, oh, this is Asian, and then the majority is East Asian, then I'm like, okay, what about my experiences? But it could also be that there's a lot of more East Asians that post things, but I think it kind of feels like people aren't aware that they are specifically East Asians when they say like, oh, this is an Asian thing, and then it doesn't apply to you and like the people of your country, then it does kind of feel weird. So one reason that I gravitated towards consuming more Asian things. I mean, I also lived in Hong Kong and a bit of time in Korea. I think having those experiences, I gravitated towards those because that made me feel less like something other. Like in Sweden, I'm always, oh, he doesn't look like us. He's something else. And I started to get similar feelings when those things happened. Like, oh, this is Asian, but no, that's East Asian. So then I started to feel like, okay, then I'm something else. It's not at as big of an extent, but I think that is, or I'd like to at least talk about it because I feel like it's not something people talk about that much. And we are on the Asian European podcast, right? So why not bring it up here?
Yeah, I actually love this topic, Dan, because even I, as an East Asian and as someone of Chinese descent, and we all know that China has the biggest population, even I at one point felt this way because when I actually started to go to this Confucius Institute to learn Mandarin, back when I was like 16, at first I was like super happy to meet a lot of other German born Chinese. But then I could also not really relate to a lot of them because they like mangas and like bubble tea. And at the time, like I hated bubble tea. I mean, I thought it was like so chemical and weird and I didn't want to try it and all these
I
things.
just remember we went for bubble tea in Amsterdam, right?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you like it?
Yeah, it grew on me,
Okay.
but it took some time as well. But going back to the topic of different kinds of Asians, I think that's very interesting as well because I think Asians are more aware of the regional differences than Western people are. But it also happens to Asians. When people say Asian, I also first think about East Asians, then like Southeast Asians, then later on South Asians. And I think that Central Asia, for example, I sometimes completely forget about because countries like Kazakhstan or Afghanistan, they're sometimes associated with other regions because of the proximity to other countries. And I even met an Indian person in Germany who told me that he doesn't think that India is part of Asia. And I was like, you are, like, it's like South Asia. And he was like, yeah, but like when people say Asia and being Asian, they don't usually mean India, They usually mean like China, Japan, Korea. And I thought about it. I was like, there is a point to it. And I can see how that can also make people feel quite excluded.
It's interesting because if I'm not mistaken, in the UK, if you say Asian, they think about South Asians. And then East Asians, Southeast Asians are more like Oriental. But don't quote me on that because I've never heard it. I just read it online. I mean, it's interesting because then it's all about, okay, what's the most prominent group that we apply the term Asian for? Because everyone, Central Asian, South Asian, East Asian, West Asian, they're all Asian. But if in one region the majority is South Asian and you used Asian for them, then you're not going to use that for East Asians because, I mean, appearance-wise and culture-wise, it's too different.
Yeah, definitely. But then going back to your cultural background, where in the Philippines are your parents from and why did they move to Sweden?
Yeah, so my parents are from the northern part of the Philippines. They actually don't speak Tagalog as their mother tongue. So Tagalog is the language around the capital, Manila. But then they're further north and they speak Ilocano instead. So we're from the Tarlac region. And they're actually from the same town, but they didn't move to Sweden together. They moved there separately. So my mom, I believe she first went to Sweden during 1980 to work as a secretary for the Nigerian embassy, which is super random. I need to actually ask her how that happened. And then my dad, he came in 1985 to work. So his sister, my aunt, she was already in Sweden, I believe, working at the Italian embassy. I need to like fact check this. And then she got him over. So they moved to Sweden for opportunity. And then they just stayed here.
I see. And then did you also learn your parents' native language growing up? And what was your relationship to Filipino culture like when you grew up in Sweden?
Yeah, that's a great question because I am one of those kids who suck at their parents' language. So I don't want to blame my parents, but what happened was they had me and they were in Sweden and they were like, oh no, we cannot make him be bad at Swedish. so we should speak Swedish with him. So I didn't learn it. And that always brought a lot of shame because I'm Filipino, or that's where my parents are from, but I don't speak the language. And I think language is so important in order to connect with the culture and the people. So not knowing the language, I always felt shameful. But during COVID, I tried to speak with my dad, only Filipino, Tagalog, and my Filipino improved. Now I'm like a 5-year-old kid, maybe. But yeah, that's my experience with it. And because I don't really speak Filipino that well, I always felt a bit distant to Filipino culture.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that as well. I don't think it was until I actually learned how to speak Mandarin that I started to feel a stronger connection to Chinese culture. And also after moving to Beijing, before that, it was always like, okay, I'm the Chinese kid, but what do I actually know about China? And my parents, Mandarin is not even their mother tongue, to be honest. We speak a Chinese dialect that is spoken in a very specific part of China that Mandarin speakers cannot understand. And I cannot even improve that language because there are hardly any resources out there to learn that, because why teach a dialect, right? So I definitely know that feeling of feeling disconnected from your culture or like your heritage because of language. But then in a previous conversation, you also told me that you once worked on an Asian dating app and helped them with growth. And we got into a conversation about dating Asians and dating as an Asian. So then there are a lot of stereotypes around Asian men, especially when it comes to dating. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that. Like, what are your thoughts on being an Asian man? And what are perhaps some things you feel Asian men have to deal with, especially in dating, but also in life, that people are often not aware of?
I don't want to have a victim mindset, but I think we can say that there's a smaller percentage of people who find Asian men attractive, which I think is actually very understandable because I think it relates to how media presents Asian men. So there's not a lot of good representation when it comes to attractive Asian men. You know, like how the Asian guys are usually portrayed as nerdy, not seen in a romantic sense. They're more like asexual. I mean, that's not a really good way to convince people that, oh, dating Asian men is an option, that they're attractive. And I totally get it because that, as we talked about before, is kind of my experience where it wasn't really media, but me growing up with not a lot of Asians. And the only Asians I saw were, my family or the friends of my family who were all older people. So there was like no attractive Asian person around me or that I met. So I had no interest in Asian people. But then, when I saw this Filipino variety show with some attractive female dancers, that's when I realized there was like a light bulb that went off in my head and was like, oh, Asian people are attractive. So I've experienced that kind of change from media, like how a certain group of people were presented to me. So I think that is happening in the West as well. And it is changing now. It's super different now compared to how it was when I was on the dating apps because of K-pop and Asian American movies. So to go back to the question, I do think you have less of a pool as an Asian man. And that's basically it. Another online study, I think it was OkCupid, found that Asian men would be the group within men that would get the least amount of connections or messages. So I think it's just a smaller pool.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I mean, you talked about this light bulb moment that made you realize that Asian people are attractive. And in a way, I feel like I never really had that. I almost feel like it went from only seeing Western looking people, like people who are non-Asian, being described as beautiful and like receiving that subconscious message that you will never be beautiful, to suddenly being popular because you're being Asian. Because the same study also shows that Asian women receive the most attention, right? But I don't necessarily feel like that is positive. I almost feel like it went from Asians are not beautiful to Asians are like sexy and being like fetishized. It creates a different kind of racism or doubt or insecurity where you ask yourself, oh, does this person like me because I'm Asian, or do they like me because I'm me? But then I was wondering, since we are talking about attractiveness, like, did you feel attractive whilst you were younger? And did you date Swedish people, or what was that like for you growing up?
I think this is connected to not seeing a lot of role models. Like, I also didn't see these hot Asian hunks. So that made me have this negative self talk. Like, so, okay, well, similar to what you talked about, like, am I attractive? Will other people find me attractive? So that led to me, I mean, like, I never, now it's going to sound sad now that I think about it, but I never hit on anyone because I was like, well, I think my chances are so low, so I'm not going to go for it, which is a mistake. And I think it definitely gave me a self-inflicted mental block. And I think, yeah, if I had role models when it comes to dating, would have made it easier. And actually, when the dating apps showed up, it actually became a lot easier for me because my concern was that, oh, I will totally get rejected if I hit on this person. But with these dating apps, it actually removed the interaction where I try to hit on someone and it doesn't work. And I'm happy that dating apps exist. I actually met my current girlfriend, or should I say future fiance? I think that's a better way to say it. I just think it's, if I say current girlfriend, that sounds like, oh, well, when's the next one? But no. So I'm going to say future fiance. I met her on Bumble. But yeah, I mean, even using these dating apps, it also reaffirmed my belief where, sure, I'm getting dates, but it's a smaller pool. I started to think about, who actually matches with me? And usually, so if it's someone who's not white, then it's like, whatever, okay, we're all non-white people, we're POC, yeah, we know what's up, we kind of can relate to each other. But if it was someone who was white, they always had some kind of interest in Asia, which again makes sense. So they've seen some, I don't know, some cool Chinese movie, or they listen to K-pop, which opened up their eyes to seeing Asian men as an attractive potential romantic partner.
I was wondering, how did you actually know that the pool you received, that it was like smaller? Did you like compare it with your male friends, or is there anything in particular that told you that the pool is somehow like smaller?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I didn't do a thorough comparison with my guy friends, but I think it was more about how when I matched with white people, they almost always had an interest in Asia. So that leads me to believe that people who are white girls who are not interested in Asian culture would not swipe on me. One other reason I think the dating pool is smaller in Sweden is because when I used the dating apps in Hong Kong, it was a lot easier to get matches. Probably because we were all Asian. So there's no like this filter, oh, he's not an option. I mean, they would see me as a potential romantic partner. So that's mainly why. But I mean, that is fair. I did not compare. So who knows?
Interesting. Yeah. For me, it's also like that question of whether to date an Asian person or not. I think I've dated people from all kinds of nationalities and backgrounds in the past, and there's also no distinct pattern when it comes to hair color, eye colors, and so on. But sometimes I'm a little bit torn because the thing is just that we are in Europe, right? So statistically speaking, you come across fewer Asians. But then I realized, because my first boyfriend, he was actually a foreign-born Chinese as well. But that actually made me realize you can be from the same cultural background, but have like very different experiences depending on your parents' perspectives and like different degrees of tradition. I felt like there was like a double barrier in the sense of both of us having like different cultures. Sure, we had like the Chinese heritage in common, but we also related to it differently in a way. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah. So talking a bit about dating non-Asians, I've gone on dates with non-Asians. I don't think it ever lasted more than a few dates. Reflecting on why it didn't work out, I think it ties into what I was talking about before about feeling like something else. And I guess that is why I've gravitated towards other Asian people, because no matter how much they're interested in Asian culture, I don't think they will really relate to my experience, like having an Asian appearance and having, these values. I think it's just very different. It's nothing wrong with that. I think you can have a great experience dating someone who doesn't share all that. But for me, it does add a lot to the relationship.
Since you put it that way, that keeps reminding you of being different or like being another. Would you say it is something that you've like internalized, or was there anything in their behavior or something they said that made you feel that way? Like, do you think that it was because of your experience growing up as a Filipino in Sweden that you just assumed that they probably will never understand, or that they maybe not as interested in you as Asian women? Yeah. Do you think it was them or you? Like, where do you draw the line here?
Yeah, I think it's a mix, but I would say it's more internalized. I think that's the bigger reason. So I would keep feeling like another, but then there was also these instances where it would be difficult for them to relate or understand my experience. So I would say it's a mix, but I want to put the main blame on my internal block. Yeah.
What do you think would it take for you to get rid of that like internal block? Have you ever thought about it or like tried to get rid of it?
I do, in general, try to remove negative self talk. And I think that's a part of it because I think it can be used as a way to victimize myself. So I've tried to remove it indirectly, but not directly, because I think it is still reality. I mean, it's one of the reasons we're here, right? That we do see ourselves as Asian Europeans. It has its pros and cons. The con is that it can lead you to victimize yourself, or you can use it as a reason for why things don't work or why you shouldn't do something. But this awareness can also make you relate to other people. I don't know if it's we're relating because we have the same internalization, but it wouldn't be the like number one thing I would try to wish away if I had a magic wish. I mean, it's given me, yeah, like this experience. I'm here because of it, because I'm thinking about the experience of being Asian. So it's not something I'm directly working on, but I am trying to remove negative self-talk.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that we're here because of it, because I think it's true. I mean, as you probably remember, in those clubhouse rooms for Asians in Europe where we met, there were so many people who were so keen on sharing their stories, on like challenging common stereotypes, and on like just connecting with other people because they, like us, have been like one of the only Asians in their hometown. And I think for me, it is also very much a way of processing my cultural identity and past experiences because, so first of all, because there were no Asians around me, there was no one to talk to about it. And then when it comes to my family, I felt like there was a tacit understanding that we are all experiencing the same form of like microaggressions and like racism, but there was also an understanding that we would not really talk about it and take it as a given, or at least whenever my parents, for example, experienced something racist, they would sometimes mention it, or at least my mom. But then when the question was like, okay, what to do about it, it was always like, it is what it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. And also, I mean, our parents' generation, they were too busy to make a living to care about these things. But I think our generation, because we have the privilege of actually having the time to reflect on our experiences, I think it's very important that we do talk about them. And I agree with you. I don't think it's necessarily something that we should wish away. I think it's good to be aware of our internalized racism as well and the biases we hold against ourselves and other Asians. But I also think that it is also what makes us unique, this bicultural or multicultural experience. And yeah, in recent years, I see more and more people turning it into their strength rather than a weakness, which I really enjoy seeing, like people writing books about it or it inspiring new forms of media. But yeah, Dan, apart from an Asian European, you're also a product designer who has worked for big brands like H&M and Klarna. And I was wondering, how and why did you get into product design?
Yeah, the way I got into product design, we can kind of connect it to watching YouTube. I was always into entertainment. So I wanted to be an actor or be a writer, somehow work in media or entertainment. But that I was like, oh, that's never going to happen. So I ended up studying media technology. I was thinking that I would be a developer and then that way somehow work with entertainment. Maybe I would be like a front-end developer at Spotify. That is how I would get my connection. But in the third year of my time at university, we had one course in UX design. So UX stands for user experience. And then UX design and product design is kind of interchangeable. And that scratched some kind of itch. So my interest in entertainment and making products people love, there's something about making other people feel good, but not in that way, but more making something people love spending time on. So I decided to study human computer interaction as my master's. And then after that, I started out as a UX researcher, thinking that, oh, I could do this. But I felt that was too far removed from actually making the design decisions. Being a UX researcher, it's more indirect. You would do research and then recommend the changes you think should be made. But then it's someone else who makes the final decision or creates the final solution. So I pivoted from UX researcher, but yeah, that's how I got into UX design or product design. And then now I'm currently working at Klarna as a product designer.
Dan, you're also a content creator and career coach on the side. How and why did you start these side projects?
So in 2020, I got laid off from the fintech startup in Hong Kong, but I did get an offer from H&M, but they were going through a reorganization, so they couldn't hire me until the reorg was done. So I had a lot of time on my hands, and I was also feeling like, oh, I need to make some extra income. So thinking of ways that I could do that. First, I tried content marketing. So my first Instagram and YouTube channel, they were focused on trying to help startup founders to reach product market fit or improve their design. But I found that super difficult to do because I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I changed to becoming a content creator about design. And also at that time, I signed up as a mentor for these design boot camps. And I realized that I was not into giving feedback on people's homework, but I really loved talking to them one-on-one. So I was like, okay, well, then I'll be a coach and just focus on those one-on-one conversations. And then I just continued making content. So then the content would kind of be a channel into my coaching services. But yeah, that's how I got into it. I'm still doing it today. Like now, I also have an online course to help people get into big tech companies. That is something I'm experimenting with.
And then, as a product designer and career coach, what advice would you give to those who want to pursue a career in product design?
So if you have no previous experience, the first thing would be to become familiar with what it means to be a UX designer. And then after that, what you should try to do is to get case studies by helping actual people or businesses, because most of the entry-level designers, they will have case studies where they either worked in a group or they worked alone on a fictional problem. But you're not going to work on fictional stuff at a company. So one way to get a really strong signal whether or not you can do the job as an entry-level designer is if you've had some experience. Because I think a lot of designers just think that, oh, designing is about designing. No, companies hire you to make them money. So you need to make a connection between your work and how a company can either earn money or save money.
Yeah, that's very true. It's similar for engineering, I think. It's always about business as well, isn't it? Like they say in product management, it's about the jobs to be done. Like they hire you to get specific jobs done, and you need to figure out what that job is or what that business goal is that is related to your function, whether it's design, engineering, or something else. But yeah, then there's one question that I love to ask at the end, and it is, what advice would you give your younger self?
So I would tell my younger self not to overthink stuff. I mean, we touched upon it a bit now about internalizing or victimizing yourself. So I would say don't overthink stuff. You don't know what might happen if you just do something, because I think I stressed a lot of times during my youth and even now, but it always works out one way or another. I often like to think about this metaphor, like living life is kind of like driving a car on a dark road. You cannot plan very far ahead. The only way to get forward is to move forward. So just enjoy the ride.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing, Dan, and thank you for taking part in the podcast. I will link your socials in the description.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was super fun.
Thank you, Dan. And if you're a listener and enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you could take the time to rate this podcast or write a review on whatever platform you're listening on. That would be a great help. Thank you.